Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this session. The next 30 minutes, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the book that I've just written. The name of the book is What the Ancient African Name and How Their Works Influence Modern Life. It's an interesting topic. What the Ancient African Name and How Their Work Influence Modern Life. As an African diaspora myself, I was fortunate to spend half of my life in Europe and in Africa. And I realized I could tell a lot about my adopted country's history. I could tell a lot about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. I can talk a lot about the British Industrial Revolution. I can even talk a lot about French Revolution, the Treaty of London. Everybody knows about Henry VIII. I've watched almost all the videos of the two World War I and World War II. And other European history. But I realized that I know very little about the history of African continent. Yes, I know a little bit about Egyptian Empire, and I also know a little bit about Oyo Empire, because that's where I grew up. That's the area that I grew up in Africa. But I know very little about the Anzom or the Nubia Empire in North Africa. I even know very little about the Ashanti Kingdom, the Mali Empire, the Ghana, and the Songhai Empire. I know very little about the Kanem Empire, even the Kingdom of Benin, and the fact that the longest human-made structure that was ever constructed on Earth was not in China, but in Nigeria, in Benin. And I also know very little about Congo Empire. I was amazed when I learned about the conical houses in Zimbabwe, in the Great Zimbabwe Empire. And I discovered, as I was talking with other diasporas and other Africans in Europe, I discovered that most of them, though learned and expert in their own field, they know very little about African history. And finally, even some of us that know a little bit about Africa, the little that we know as diaspora, because of the hustle and bustle of trying to settle down in a foreign land as a diaspora to provide for our family, we really have time to share even the little history we know about Africa with our children. I believe the greatest challenge facing African diaspora, both at home and abroad and around the world, is the scarcity of knowledge about ancient African history that is passed to the next generation. I'll give you a quote. It was said by Dr. Asa Hillard. He is one of the great educationists. He said the education of African people is an urgent necessity. It is a matter of life and death. We cannot afford the risk of another generation of children who have no identity or are ignorant about Africa. And I believe this statement. I believe what he said is true. I believe it's so important for us to learn about African history, not only for anything, it will help us to become stable even on this earth. The late Professor Amos Wilson said, it's another great educator. He said the purpose of education is not just to get a good job with great companies. Getting a great job with good company is good, but it's not the only purpose. He said the real purpose of education is to improve and further the interests of one's own group and to ensure its survival. He said the Indians, the Chinese, the Jews, and other cultural groups have understood the importance of their history, and they have worked extremely hard towards educating their children about their history from their own perspective. However, African people have often looked at these cultural groups, that is the Jewish, the Indians, and the Chinese, and marveled at how they are united and wonder why it's so different from our home community. which seem to be fragmented and disorganized. Finally, why do we need to learn about our history? God Almighty was about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he had a friend called Abraham. Look at what he said in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verse 17 to 19. The Bible says, and the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? What was God about to do? He was about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they've sinned. But God believed that that particular history is so important that 2,000, 3,000 years after that, we need to be aware of it. And he said, whom will I tell to? He said, surely I want to tell Abraham, my friend. For Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation. And he will teach his children and his household after him. This again emphasized the importance of teaching our children about our history. It is our responsibility to teach our children about history from our perspective, not from other people's perspective. The traditional Eurocentric perspective that we are all taught, memorized, that dominated our book, have always taught us that we are from slavery and our forefathers have no history. I completely beg to differ in this book. And that's one of the things you're going to get when you read this book. Finally, I'm quoting Chinua Achebe. He said, the last 400 and 500 years of European contact with Africa has produced a body of literature that presented Africa in a very bad light, and Africa in very lurid terms. The reason for this had to do with the need to justify the slave trade and slavery. And this was said by Chinua Achebe, an African novelist and poetry. The late Ivan Van Semitima, he said, the nerve of the world has been deadened for centuries to the vibration of African geniuses. The essence of this book is to send an electrical impulses to this long deadened nerve of African history, to highlight history, that African history is very significant. So what am I going to cover during this session? I'm going to emphasize on why we need to teach African history, why it's so important. You know, a lot of people will look at it and say, now, why this has nothing to do with other people, it has to do with our survival. Secondly, I'm going to highlight some of the ancient black African civilizations. Civilizations that existed 2,000 years before European, even when European was still savages and where they're still backward. Civilizations that existed 2,000 years before. For example, Egypt civilization was around 2,000 years before Greek and 2,500 before Roman Empire. I will highlight some of the inventions made by Black African, ancient Black Africa, that make significant contribution to world civilization. Many of us don't know that some of these things that we enjoy now are product of things that have been done in the past. And in the course of this book, I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to highlight some of the food products that was domesticated by ancient Africa, that now became beneficial to the modern world. It's going to be So the question now is, why is it important that we teach African history? According to Winston Churchill, he said, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I think Mr. Winston Churchill cannot be more right. Because history is inescapable. Ultimately, we are product of history. Our language, our culture, our traditions, and religions in our society here are all products of history. Even the technology and the civilization that we see as if is new was from our history. It was built upon from our history. The origin of it started in the past. We build upon it, and that's why our generation is enjoying by this. History studies the past and the legacy in the present. History connects things through time and encourages learner to take long view of such connection. Now, one unquestionable fact that all scientists and anthropologists have taken, all agree, is that all modern man emanates from Africa. That means Africa is rich in the history of humanity and the origin of many civilizations. To miss such a vital information is not only wrong, but disservice to the next generation. The position of African history in the world history, if you take African history out, the world history will not make sense. And as we go into our session today, we will see why that is the case. Now, the history of Africa dates back before the modern man. And whether you are aware of this or not, the lighting of fire in East Africa 2 million years ago was a game changer for human beings. Fire is a groundbreaking event in the development of humanity. Why? Because from it, human being was able to cook his food. And somebody will ask me, what is the significance of that? If you watch wildlife and you look at lion and tiger and other predators, one thing that is peculiar about them is that they will go and hunt. And when they kill an animal, they will eat it. Do you notice that immediately when they finish eating, they fall asleep? The reason why they fall asleep is that the amount of energy that their body requires to burn that protein into usable material for their body takes so much on them that they have to sleep through. And when they wake up 10 hours later, they go out and hunt again. And that's why tiger, lion, and all these predators have not developed more than how they've developed. But what happened with human beings? When human beings started cooking food, in the process of cooking, we are able to pre-digest some of our food. So that by the time we eat it, within 4 hours, the food has digested, and our body can start making use of it. And the consequence of that is that we stay awake longer. As a result of staying awake longer, I started thinking. We become more creative. We're able to create fishing hooks, bows, arrows, and boats. Not only that, the it allowed us to be able to live everywhere. Prior to the lightning, most human beings are restricted to the equator. Hence, why human beings, first of all, emanate from the equator, because they don't have a lot of hair on their skin to be able to live outside the equator. So human being was destined for the equator. But as man created fire and able to warm themselves, they're able to emigrate to other environments. And that's how dispersion started with human being. All this happened before the history of writing. Now, anthropologists believed that our human ancestors, when they shed their hair from their body, they have to take on dark complexion so that they can be able to prevent themselves from the ultraviolet ray. Like I said earlier, woman was created in the equator at the extreme of sun. And as fire came, they were able to move to other parts. But while they're in the equator, as they begin to shed their hairs, they begin to develop black skin so they can cope with ultraviolet ray. Now, I'm a pig farmer. Research has shown that if you take large white pig, a pig that is white, and you throw it in the wilderness, within 2 to 3 years, if the animal is in the wild without any protection, the animal will develop dark skin. The reason why pigs develop dark skin in the wild is that one, it helps them to camouflage. 2, because they don't have roofs or pen where they can stay, they're exposed to the sun 24/7. So they darken their skin to prevent the effect of the ultraviolet ray. That's how all human beings started up as blacks. And as we see later, as human being begins to migrate, and I wrote a lot about what makes the complexion of human being to change from dark to dark brown to what we call white now or pink. There are 4 factors which I expatiate on in my book. First is the sun itself, the effect of the sun. Second one is the melanin. The third one are the enzymes in human body, the hormones in human body that were not there originally, that begin to activate and make man to become lighter in complexion. But we're not going to go into that. If you want to read more about that, you can find it in the book. Now, African history happened before the advent of written history. So before human beings started writing, most of the things that we're talking about happened. Don't forget that the whole concept of writing started in Africa about 5,000-6,000 years ago. So if I tell you that Africa set up lights 2 million years ago, you can imagine those things will not be written. So one of the reasons why African history is very rare, where not is spoken about Africa, is because most of it are not written. Because most of these things happened before Africa themselves invented the art of writing. Secondly, most of our history is passed from mouth to mouth. Like when I was very young, very young. My father, when I was doing electricity in my village, when we go to the village, there's no electricity. In the night, all the children would ride around the elders, and they start telling us stories about our forefathers, about what they do, their plight, and things like that. So one of the things we realize is that African story was passed from word of mouth, and that's why as time passed by, through the history that African has gone through, which I spend more time in my book, our story becomes distorted and become misrepresented. And as a result, many young black people struggle to understand or consciously articulate their positive historical events. And lack of positive historical events has been linked to high suicide rate and mental health challenges in areas where there are minorities. For example, the same thing happened with the Aborigines, because they lost their history. There's the incident of more alcoholic, mental health, and suicide rate. The same with the Red Indians, the same thing with the blacks in Canada, and the same thing with even blacks in the diaspora. Research has shown that in many Western culture, the proportion of blacks that are prone to suicide and mental health challenges are higher. Because why? Memory is the foundation of self and society. The more we know about our past, positively, the more we'll be able to survive. Now let's look at this. There's a guy called Brian Barber. He did a work. He created a theory called identity relevance of meaning. Strong evidence has shown that cultural and historical identity plays a significant role in youth resilience and wellness. Now, I'm a qualified social worker, and one of the things I realize is that people that know their past are always stronger. And the Bible says the people that do know their God will be strong and do exploit. And the people that do know their history, that do know where they are coming from, tend to be strong and able to do exploit. Research has shown that cultural and historical identity plays a significant role in youth wellness and resilience. And resilience is the process by which people overcome life challenges, especially as they encounter and respond to hardship experience. Because when we are faced with diverse challenge that is bigger than us, we need to look up. We need to look up to our forefathers. We need to look into the past. I remember about a month ago in the United Kingdom, Her Royal Highness, the Queen of Elizabeth of England, died. And I saw people queuing for 15 to 16 hours just to come and have a glimpse of the coffin of the Queen of England. Now, 99% of people that queue, I probably have never seen her before, never had any personal interaction with her before. But it's what she stands for. She stands for something bigger than now. She stands for something bigger than their family. She stands for something that has to do with the history. And I could see that when they were doing the burial, they make sure that during those 10 days of mourning, they display every positive historical aspect of United Kingdom. From the way they announced the burial, it was the same way they announced it 900 years ago. The way they asked the talebearer to be shouting, even in this day of technology, they still make sure they follow the procedure because that was history. They make sure they bury her in a church that is 900 years old. That is history, and you could see a lot of people coming out, even people that are so-called non-monarchists, who do not believe in monarchy, are coming out in large force because it's history. It's something beyond them. It's something beyond their family. Brian Barber, who is the author of Identity Relevance Meaning, Identity Relevance Meaning theory, states that if young people can make sense of their experience by locating themselves and their situation within historical understanding and community minutes, they will better overcome hardship, sustain psychological health, and contribute to the society at large. Let me take it again. He said, if young people can make sense of their experience by locating themselves and their situation within historical understanding and community meanings, they will better overcome hardship, sustain psychological health, and contribute to the society at large. Brian Barber. Basically, what he said is that collective positive cultural memories helps individuals to find their place in larger temporal society and societal context and situate them as an actor in the world. Young people do better if they identify with values that transcend beyond themselves, that transcend beyond their family, that transcend beyond who and what they are. And that's why it's so important that understanding the ancient African history should help young black people to find a meaningful connection with their heritage and its role in their life. Let me take that quote again. According to Brian Barber, he said, if young people can make sense of their experiences by locating themselves and their situation within historical understanding and community meanings, they will better overcome hardship, sustain psychological health, and contribute to the society at large. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's any reason why young people, why black young people all over the world should understand what their ancient name and their contribution to the modern world, it's now. It's not only a matter of Black Lives Matter, it's not only for the good of black people, it's for the good for the society at large. Because it's from this history that we trace who we are and where we are going. It's from this history that we continue to forge and build on what our forefathers have done and make a significant contribution. Now that we understand why it's so important for young people to know about their history, how it will help them to build resilience, and how this resilience will be able to help them not only to overcome challenges, but to be able to be able to design their own contribution to the society at large. We're going to be looking at the history of Africa. We're going to move to the second bit, which is the history of Africa. Africa was derived from Latin origin, which means Africa, meaning sunny, hot. This name was also traced to the Greek origin, called Afriki, which is, Afriki means cold. Afriki means without cold. That means basically, Africa is hot place. Compared to the rest of the earth, Africa is the hottest. Now, Africa, to many, to the surprising of many, Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent. I went to the London Memorial Center for the World War II veterans, and I saw that in the pool they put the name of the people that fight in the war. They put Bangladesh, they put Pakistan, they put India, and at the fort they put Africa. They juxtapose as if Africa is a nation. So young people will go there and look at it and think Africa is just a nation. But Africa is not a nation, it's made up of 56 countries. Africa is a diverse continent in language, in geography, various urban and rural culture, lifestyle, religion, genetic variation, and political. Africa is not a black nation. It does not only contain black people. It contains, in fact, research has shown that in Africa there's more genetic variation of the color of the skin more than any part of the world. So you see somebody like me who is darker with the small nose, I'm from West Africa. You see somebody who is lighter in complexion from Ethiopia. You see Egypt is even lighter. You go to South Africa, lighter. You go to different parts of Nigeria, there's different variation. Even in Nigeria, there's some parts of Nigeria that are as white as in complexion as more than Arabs. And they've never left Nigeria before. So Africa is diverse. In my book, I took time to explain what you call founder's effect, where there's variation of color in Africa. If you go to that section in my book, you'll find it. Now, early archaeological discovery of human development were found in ancient Africa, in the Cape of Africa. So here you will see the cave here. Is the cave, is the oldest cave. It's 73-year-old drawings was found in the cave in South Africa. This drawing. You can see that people have been drawing and have been doing abstract drawing in Africa, not only during the Da Vinci period, not only during the Michelangelo period, not only during the Picasso period, but as far back as 73 years ago. And this is ancient shell discovered in Morocco. That's 80,000 to 2,000 years ago, where they have perforated shell. And this happened to be the oldest, the earliest form of abstract drawing in the world. Now let's talk a little bit about Egypt Empire. Now, I know many people knows a lot about Egypt. We all know that it's arguably the most well-known of African ancient civilization. It began 340 years BC. It has the first recorded monarch in history. It was the city of Memphis in ancient Egypt was built 3,100 years ago. 2,000 years before any civilization in Europe. While they are building this, Europe was in dark ages. And I'm not saying it sarcastically. I'm saying it factually and I'm saying it historically. The Greek, which is regarded as the foundation of civilization in Europe, was built 1,200 years BC. That is 2,000 years after they built pyramids, in Egypt. And 1,000 years, and where Rome was built 1,000 years ago, why is Roman important? Because Europe means Roman colony. So basically, all the colonies, all European colonies, Germany, France are all colonies, as Commonwealth are colonies of Europe, of England, so is Europe colonies of Romans. And as historical as Roman is only 1,000 years BC, 1,000 BC, that means Africa have been developing, have been civilized 2,000 years before even Europe started thinking of civilization. Why Europe was in dark ages? And like I said again, I'm not saying it I'm not saying it I'm saying it factually and I'm saying it historically because it's so important that we put this thing into perspective. It's not a matter of saying something to please anybody, it's a matter of stating facts. Because without it, we will not be able to move forward. Unlike Greek and the Roman, the early African civilizations also had to invent everything, because unlike Greek and Roman, which build upon most of the civilization in Greek and Roman, the Greek will say they learn everything that they learned from Egypt and they build on it. So also is the Romans. But African civilization, they have to learn it from the scratch. They were the first, and they could not learn how to learn it from the scratch. That means they are the foundation of all the knowledge that we use these days. They are forced to discover metallurgy, which is the study of metal. I'm going to talk about it a bit. They are forced to discover astronomy. The writing, which started about 4,000 years ago, started in Africa, and that's why most of the history of Africa were not written. Paper, medicine. The first medicine book was found in Africa. The first university was founded in Africa. The first mechanical machinery that goes to the design of pyramids were also formed in Egypt. However, ladies and gentlemen, one thing I want to say at this stage is to say that it's not only in Egypt that development was happening. Civilization was happening throughout the whole of Africa. And it's very important to point that out. And that's what we'll be looking at. Because many people assume that the only civilization was in Egypt. And that's why many people assume it's probably the whites that came to Egypt and come and develop it. As we're going to see in this story I'm going to write, this presentation, there are a lot of civilizations in different parts of Africa. It's not only in Egypt. There's Askum. We're going to talk a little bit about Askum, about the Ethiopian, the Great Zimbabwe, the Congo Empire, the Benin Empire, the Akan Empire, the Fulani Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai, the Ghana, the Fulani Empire, the Empire of Kanem. All of these civilizations were happening while Egypt was happening. Some of them precede Egypt. Some of them were after Egypt. Actually, according to history, the Egyptian learned their building pyramid from Askum. We're going to go to that in a minute. But what this one is telling us straight away is that civilization is not just limited in African civilization is not just limited in Egypt. There's more of African civilization apart from Egypt. Egypt is the one that many of us are aware of, but in this presentation, I'm going to take you through some of the civilization that happened even beyond Egypt. Let's look at the Kingdom of Dubai, for example. This flourished in 1059, 169 to 350 BC. And it's what you call the present day Sudan. It's regarded as the land of great natural wealth for ivory and gold. It was a trading partner and a rival to ancient Egypt. So what you see that most of us are familiar with Egypt, But Egypt learned a lot of what they did from Nubia, which is in Sudan, which is farther down.